It was the 1st of October when the crisp autumn breeze swept through the air, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of fallen leaves and a hint of something more, something darker. The leaves crunched beneath our feet, and the twilight sky turned golden, signaling the arrival of autumn, my favorite season. A time not only of colors and fading warmth, but of whispered secrets and lurking shadows. A time when the boundary between the known and the unknown thins, and when those who dare to step beyond may never return the same. Welcome to Fearforge. Tonight, I bring you 3 chilling autumn tales. Stories pulled from the very heart of fear. Stories that hide within the quiet streets, abandoned houses, and empty forests of October nights. Stories that begin innocently enough, with nothing more than a visit to buy fall decorations, a hike through a tranquil trail, or a dare to explore an old house. But they all end in something much, much darker. In this episode, we explore the kind of fear that grows slowly, like shadows lengthening in the autumn sun. We will walk alongside those who once thought their adventures were simply another autumn experience, until they faced something that turned those crisp fall nights into unforgettable nightmares. Tonight, brace yourself, because you are about to hear 3 stories that capture the essence of terror in the most beloved season of the year. These are stories that remind us that behind every beautifully colored leaf, behind every pumpkin and bonfire, there is a hidden, sinister side waiting to be revealed. Stay with me as we step into the chilling embrace of Fearforge. These are the tales of autumn fear, and they are very real. Story 1. It was the beginning of October, and the spirit of Halloween was already seeping into every corner of the town. The protagonist, Emily, was particularly excited this year. It was her first autumn in her new home with her boyfriend Carter, and she wanted everything to be perfect for the season. She planned to surprise him by decorating the house in true Halloween fashion, complete with pumpkins, dried leaves, and all the eerie little details that would make their place truly festive. She had already picked up some decorations from local stores, but she wanted more, a lot more. Scrolling through Facebook Marketplace, Emily's eyes caught sight of a listing that seemed almost too good to be true. The image showed a large green plastic container brimming with autumn-themed decorations, scarecrows, wreaths, candles, everything one would need for a proper Halloween transformation. The price was absurdly low, just $20. The ad mentioned that everything had to go, as the seller was clearing out the house. The post itself seemed simple enough, but something about it left Emily slightly uneasy. The seller's profile was oddly bare, no friends, no public information, just the name Cody and a profile picture of someone wearing a cap, their face almost entirely hidden under the brim. But the deal seemed worth it, and Emily shrugged off her hesitation. She reached out to Cody, who responded almost immediately. He confirmed that the decorations were still available and that she could come by that very evening to pick them up. He even sent an address, and Emily's heart skipped a beat when she saw it. It wasn't in the best part of town. She hesitated for a moment but quickly reasoned with herself. It was broad daylight, and she could ask her friend Sally to come along. Sally was always up for an adventure, and besides, it would be fun to have a little company. Later that day, Emily picked up Sally, who joked about the weird part of town they were headed to. They made light of the situation, but Emily could sense that Sally was a little uneasy too. The drive took about 30 minutes, with Sally cracking jokes the entire time to keep the mood light. As they approached the address, the neighborhood started to change. The houses were older, the street lights few and far between, and the general atmosphere felt a little less friendly. They finally pulled up to the house, a small, run-down one with chipped paint and an overgrown yard. It looked completely ordinary, yet something about it made Emily's skin prickle. The driveway was empty, but a soft light glowed faintly from behind the closed blinds of the living room window. Emily texted Cody, letting him know they were there. Almost instantly, she saw movement in the window, a quick flicker as if someone was watching them before the blind snapped back into place. Her phone buzzed. Cody's message read, "I'm here, you can come in." Emily frowned and showed the message to Sally, who shook her head, her expression serious now. "That's super weird. Why would he want us to go inside?" Sally whispered, They both decided they would ring the doorbell first. If things seemed off, they would leave immediately. They got out of the car, the evening air suddenly feeling a little too cold for comfort. The front door opened just as they stepped onto the porch, and a figure appeared, partially obscured by the door frame. "Hey, come on in," the man said, his voice deep and almost echoing in the dimness. Only half of his body was visible, and Emily felt a shiver race down her spine at how he stayed just out of sight. Emily called out, "Are you Cody?" But the man didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped back, opening the door wider, and Emily caught a glimpse of a shadowy interior, dimly lit by a single lamp. "Come in, it's all here," the man repeated, gesturing towards the darkness. Emily hesitated, her instincts screaming at her now. She could hear Sally mutter behind her, "This doesn't feel right." Ignoring the growing unease, Emily took a small step forward but then stopped. Something was wrong, very wrong. The man stepped away from the door entirely, disappearing into the house without another word. That's when Emily decided she had had enough. "Let's go," she whispered to Sally, who didn't need any more convincing. They both turned, moving quickly back towards the car, their footsteps heavy on the wooden porch. Suddenly, they heard it, a soft creak, the unmistakable sound of the door closing behind them. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced back, catching just a flicker of movement in the window once more. Someone was watching them. They practically ran to the car, Sally fumbling with the handle in her haste to get in. Emily glanced up at the house one last time before she jumped into the driver's seat. The blinds in the window shifted slightly, and for a brief second, she saw a pale face behind the glass, expressionless, staring. She slammed the door, started the car, and they sped off, not saying a word until they were several blocks away. What the hell was that? Sally finally broke the silence, her voice shaky. Emily shook her head, her grip tight on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but whatever it was, I'm glad we got out of there." The rest of the ride was quiet, the weight of what had happened settling over them like a dark cloud. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly avoided something terrible. When she got home, she told Carter everything, and he insisted on looking up the house online. The next day, he told her something that made her blood run cold. A woman in her 60s owned the property, and according to records, she lived there alone. Emily didn't know who, or what, had been in that house with them, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never, ever buy anything off Marketplace again if it involved going to someone's house. Story 2. It was a cool autumn afternoon when Mark decided to take a hike through DuPont State Forest, just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of fallen leaves, and the forest was painted in shades of orange, yellow, and deep reds. It was the kind of day that made him feel at peace, disconnected from the business of life. The trail was empty, the perfect opportunity for some solitude and reflection, with only the gentle rustle of leaves underfoot and the distant sound of birds breaking the silence. The forest felt calm, almost dreamlike, as if it existed in a world separate from everything else. Mark had only walked for about 20 minutes when he first saw her. She stood on the edge of the trail, partially obscured by the trees, her gaze fixed directly on him. He couldn't make out much of her features from that distance. She had short, grayish-blonde hair and wore a light-colored jacket. Mark gave her a small nod, more out of politeness than anything else, but she didn't move, didn't acknowledge him in any way. She simply stood there, watching. He shook off the unease that crept up his spine and continued walking, telling himself she was probably just another hiker who got lost in her thoughts. The trail grew steeper, winding its way up towards high falls, and Mark focused on his footing, feeling the slight burn in his legs as he ascended. He glanced back down the trail every now and then, hoping to catch another glimpse of the woman, but she was gone. He kept moving, letting the tranquility of the forest return to him. About half an hour later, he reached a small clearing that offered a beautiful view of the waterfalls. He sat down on a rock, taking out his water bottle, and as he was about to take a sip, he saw her again. She was standing farther down the path, still watching him. This time, she was closer, her face partially visible in the shadows of the trees. Her eyes were dark, sunken even, and her expression was completely unreadable. It wasn't just that she was there. It was the way she seemed to emerge from nowhere, her silence almost unnatural. Mark felt his stomach twist in a way he couldn't quite explain. He got up, deciding it was time to head back. He wasn't in the mood for games, and whoever she was, it didn't seem like she wanted a friendly chat. He kept his pace brisk, feeling the tension in his shoulders. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the forest, making everything look a little different, a little more menacing. As he approached a covered bridge near the beginning of the trail, Mark paused to catch his breath. He turned and, once again, she was there, standing at the far end of the bridge. She was closer than she had ever been before, her face now visible in the dim light. Mark's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes seemed to lock onto his, and her mouth was slightly open, as if she were trying to say something. Before he could react, she turned and walked away, her steps unnaturally quick and silent. Something about her presence gnawed at him. She moved too fluidly, too silently for someone of her age. Mark decided not to follow. Instead, he hurried back to his car, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Each time, he expected to see her, but the path remained empty. The relief that washed over him when he finally reached his car was palpable. He drove home, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in his chest. That night, Mark was exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. He tossed and turned, his mind replaying the unsettling encounters over and over. He couldn't shake the image of her face, the vacant stare, the strange way she seemed to appear and disappear as if she were a shadow given form. At some point, Mark must have drifted off because he was suddenly wide awake, his heart pounding as if he had been running. The room was dark, but there was a figure standing at the foot of his bed. It was her. Mark's breath caught in his throat, and his entire body went cold. The woman was there, her face barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlight outside his window. She stood motionless, her eyes fixed on him, and Mark felt as if every ounce of warmth had been sucked from the room. He opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Slowly, the woman turned and walked out of the room, vanishing through the doorway without a sound. Mark scrambled to turn on the lamp, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The room was empty, but the terror lingered, thick and suffocating. He jumped out of bed, turned on every light in his apartment, and checked every corner, every closet. But she was gone. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night, too scared to close his eyes, fearing what he might see when he opened them again. 2 days later, Mark received a call from his mother. She informed him that his aunt had passed away. She had been sick for a long time, and though he had never been close to her, Mark couldn't help but feel the air grow heavy when his mother sent him a picture of her. His aunt looked eerily similar to the woman he had seen on the trail, the same short, grayish hair, the same distant eyes. Mark didn't know what to think. Part of him wanted to believe it had all been a trick of his tired mind, a cruel coincidence. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had followed him home that day. Was she really a ghost, or merely a hallucination? Some presences, real or imagined, have the power to chill us to the very soul. Story 3. It was a chilly October night when Ryan and his friend Tom decided to explore the old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It had been the subject of local rumors for years. People claimed it was haunted, cursed, or worse. To them, it was a perfect setting for some late-night fun. Both friends were feeling adventurous, the kind of thrill-seeking excitement that only comes with a full season and a few beers in the system. They parked their car a block away, the engine still warm from the drive, and quietly made their way down the dark street. The house stood alone, surrounded by a forgotten garden that had turned into a mess of weeds and thorny bushes. Its structure was tall but narrow, the windows dark and broken, with shreds of curtains fluttering slightly in the wind. The air was cold, and there was a strange silence that made the friends uneasy, But they pressed on, their flashlights casting long shadows across the neglected front yard. The back door was already cracked open, almost like it had been waiting for them. Ryan pushed the door, and it swung open with a loud creak that echoed through the house. The air inside was thick with a musty, damp odor that stung their noses. They stepped into the darkness, their flashlights barely cutting through the heavy shadows. The narrow hallway was lined with old wallpaper, peeling off in long, curling strips, and the wooden floor beneath them groaned with every step. They moved cautiously, peeking into different rooms. The place felt strangely cramped, as if the walls were leaning inwards, and every room was cluttered with old, forgotten furniture that seemed to belong to another era. Cobwebs hung in the corners like lace, and dust coated everything, muffling their footsteps. Tom was the first to laugh nervously, his voice a little too loud in the small space. "This place is a real fixer-upper," he joked, trying to shake off the creeping unease. After wandering around the ground floor, Ryan found a door that led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. He gestured to Tom, and with a shrug, Tom nodded. "Only one way to find out what's down there," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. Ryan opened the door, and a cold draft rushed out. He took a deep breath and started down, each step creaking ominously beneath his weight. Halfway down, he noticed a soft glow coming from the basement. He paused, turning off his flashlight to see it better. There was definitely a faint light. 2 candles, tall and flickering, casting shadows on the wall. He swallowed hard, his stomach clenching as he peeked around the corner. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the center of the basement, beside an old table, there was a rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth. A figure sat in it, back turned towards Ryan. All he could see was a frail hand resting on the armrest of the chair, swaying slightly with the movement. His heart pounded painfully in his chest, the hairs on his arms standing on end. He knew he should leave, but his feet felt glued to the spot. Slowly, as if in a trance, Ryan began to back away, trying to make as little noise as possible. Each step he took seemed to amplify the creaks of the stairs, that were groaning beneath his weight. He was nearly at the top when one particularly loud creak echoed through the basement. He stopped, breath caught in his throat, and glanced back down. The rocking chair had stopped moving. The candles flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the basement into darkness. Ryan's pulse raced, and without another second's hesitation, he bolted up the stairs. He slammed the door behind him, the sound reverberating through the cramped hallways. He didn't bother being quiet anymore. He just needed to find Tom and get out. "Tom!" Ryan whisper-shouted as he made his way back through the narrow corridors. He found his friend upstairs, peering into one of the small bedrooms. "We need to leave. Now," he hissed. Tom, sensing the urgency in Ryan's voice, didn't ask questions and quickly followed. As they made their way towards the back door, they passed by the narrow hallway where the door to the basement stood slightly ajar. Both of them froze as they saw it, a figure, tall and shadowy, standing just behind the door. It was motionless, and though its face was obscured by the darkness, they could feel its gaze. Panic surged through them. They dashed towards the exit, their footsteps echoing as they ran. They didn't stop until they were out the door, sprinting across the overgrown yard, the cold air biting at their skin. They reached the car, breathless and shaking, and Ryan fumbled with the keys before finally getting the engine started. The tires screeched as they sped away, neither of them daring to look back. It wasn't until they were miles away that Tom finally spoke, his voice shaky. "What the hell was that?" Ryan shook his head, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but we are never going back there again." That night, they learned that some abandoned places are better left forgotten, because you never know what or who might be waiting in the shadows. As the days grow shorter and the crisp autumn air descends upon us, we are reminded that fall is not just a season of changing leaves and festive cheer, but also a time when shadows seem to grow longer, and the boundary between the known and unknown becomes blurred. It's a time when the veil between our world and the world of the unseen thins, allowing for eerie encounters and unsettling stories to surface. Have you ever felt like something or someone was watching you in the dark? A fleeting chill, an inexplicable noise, or a shadow that shouldn't be there? If you dare, share your story with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear your chilling experiences. And remember, fear has a way of creeping in when we least expect it. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and be sure to join us for our next night of haunting tales. Until then, keep your lights on and your doors locked, because the real horror may be closer than you think. Subscribe to Fearforge, where we turn the shadows into stories, and the stories into nightmares. See you in the next chilling night.